Good morning, everyone. It looks like we are almost at our start time, so I think we're getting things going and trying to unmute my own cell phone here, and we will get started in just a minute. All right, good morning, everybody. It's now 10 o'clock, so we're going to get started here in just a minute. I wanted to start the live video, let everybody get a chance to see that it's up. If anybody was planning on joining us at 10, give them a chance to do so. So good morning. Thanks for joining me for another virtual coffee hour. During different times, we enjoy doing these, at least a couple times a month, bouncing around different Washtenaw County locations to try to do it at different times and locations that are convenient to folks. And so now we're doing the same sort of thing online, having town halls and events like this, trying to do it on different platforms so that people who are connected on different platforms can feel that there's something available to them. There's been a lot happening in Lansing, a lot to update you on. Most of that action has been at the executive level with respect to the governor's executive orders and all the things that she's doing as part of her executive office to try to keep this safe during this pandemic. But there's also more and more happening in the legislature. Things are trying to get going. So that's the ground I hope to cover. And, I'm hoping to do that in maybe 20 minutes or so. And then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions that people have. I know based on the town hall we had last week, we'll probably have a lot of questions on unemployment, and we'll probably have questions on, what exactly do these executive orders mean? But in the meantime, I do want to talk just a little bit about kind of setting the table, what's been happening, and also just tell you a little bit about what we've been doing out of my office in Lansing during the last couple of weeks since we've had our last update. So a lot has happened in terms of governor's executive orders. I think it's important to start there. As I'm sure everybody knows, the governor's stay home, stay safe order is still in effect. And just last night, she extended the stay home, stay safe order until June 12th. Also announced this week was a continuation of the phased regional reopening that the governor announced several weeks ago. And just this week, I think it was on Tuesday when she announced that starting this weekend, there was going to be a relaxation of the stay home order in the regions that are in northern Michigan. So in the Traverse City area and all of the Upper Peninsula. The announcement that she's made is that restaurants can start opening up, and as long as they're maintaining certain distancing, and as long as they are following rules with respect to sanitation and PPE, as long as they're making sure that they're taking steps to make sure that their waiting areas are converted to in parking lot waiting areas and things like that. Those kinds of facilities are going to open up in northern Michigan this weekend. So, we'll see how that goes. I think there's a lot of folks who were clamoring for that. I think there's a lot of folks who are concerned about what that could do. And I've certainly heard from a lot of folks who are saying that they're seeing, their neighbors pack up and head north. So, I think everybody's concerned about, having a phased, reasonable reopening in a way that makes sense for our economy and in a way that gets folks back to work as soon as possible. But I think folks are also very, very concerned, and I know the governor is very concerned about doing that in a way that doesn't cause us to fall right back into the hole that we were in a couple months ago, which could, of course, do a lot more damage, not just in terms of lives lost, but also in terms of those economic factors that people are paying attention to. Also this week, the governor issued an executive order that was a clarification on how the state is working with nursing homes. Several weeks ago when this all started, this was one of the first concerns that I flagged for the administration, nursing homes and prisons. These are facilities that the state has a lot of authority and responsibility for, and wherein it's going to be very, very difficult to manage infections. We already know that in facilities like this, infection control is already a concern. And so, what the governor did this week was she issued a clarification of her executive order that she issued about a month ago that basically makes it clear that when folks who are in nursing homes are diagnosed positive with COVID-19, exactly how they're supposed to be separated, whether that means a transfer to a regional hub or whether that means, that a facility has stood up a separate isolated wing within their facility. Those are kind of the two ways that the department is encouraging nursing homes to work with individuals who who test positive. And then also her executive order had some clarifications on sort of exactly how does it work when those individuals end up being taken out of the nursing home and put in hospitalized, and then when they're discharged, and so clarifying that those individuals would be going to the regional hubs that had been set up over the course of the last 6 or 8 weeks. So the governor also, has given the legislature a strong update on sort of what's happened recently in the prisons. That was another area of concern that a lot of us had and have been communicating with the administration about. We're trying to monitor closely all the numbers and all the testing there. The prisons are one of the areas where they've now completed complete testing of every single inmate and every single worker. And so that's a positive step. And also the prison population is trending down pretty dramatically for a combination of two reasons. One, the administration has accelerated the parole process. They did get the parole board working more quickly to analyze the cases that were of those folks who were closer to parole to try to move them along. And so the speed at which they've been working people through the parole process who are eligible has increased. And then also the probably larger effect on the prison population is that there no longer is the same inflow. So for over the course of the last couple of months, the number of individuals who have actually been sent to prison has plummeted. It's gone way, way, way down. And so as a result, the prison population is trending down. And I think that's an overall positive thing, both in terms of trying to end this problem we have with mass incarceration, and because of the other thing that we learned about over the course of the last couple of weeks since our last update, which is not surprising to any of us who've been paying close attention, but we had our consensus revenue estimating conference. I believe it was on May 15th. This is always one of the biggest events in the rhythm of the legislature, because this is when all the different economists from the Senate Fiscal Agency and the House Fiscal Agency and from the administration and from our universities get together and estimate how much revenue they think the state is going to get from all the various sources, sales tax, income tax, gas taxes, all the fees, everything across state government, real estate transfer, everything. And it's not surprising that they estimated that the state of Michigan, because of the pandemic and because of the response, is facing a tremendous budget challenge going forward. The magnitude of that at this time is estimated at somewhere around $6 billion over the next 3 fiscal years. And let me just break that down a little bit. The state of Michigan has a fiscal year that starts on October 1st. So we are about 3/4 of the way through the current fiscal year that we're in. We're going to see a revenue loss during this fiscal year. We're also going to see a larger revenue loss during the next fiscal year because we've got a whole year to realize that. And then finally, the economists are estimating lingering effects in even the next fiscal year after that. And over the course of those next 2.5 years, essentially, they're estimating about a $6 billion shortfall, which is a tremendous challenge for the state of Michigan. And some of my more conservative colleagues have already started talking about major cuts to per pupil funding, which is the biggest and most important thing that the state of Michigan does. And if you look at the state budget, there are only so many places to cut. And the biggest areas where the state is invested in meeting the needs of our people are with respect to schools and with respect to healthcare assistance for poor people. And those are top priorities for me. I think they're top priorities for our district and the people here in Washtenaw County. And so, I'm very, very concerned about what these estimates mean about our state budget. And of course, because the state is not the federal government, we have to have a balanced budget every year. We can't run deficits like the federal government can and has. So what we have to do now, per the terms of our Constitution, is we have to rather quickly right-size our budget to these new revenue estimates that we got on May 15th. And that's going to be tremendously challenging. We've already started talking about it. We do not have an appropriations meeting scheduled for this upcoming week, but the chairman of the Appropriations Committee has already indicated that that conversation is going to start in earnest. And it's already starting now before our anticipated first meeting the Wednesday after next. So that's kind of what we're facing there. And the backdrop for that, of course, is that, many of us have been talking with our federal leaders. I know I've reached out to our senators, and I've had several conversations with Congresswoman Dingell about the importance of federal assistance for the states. We all know that weeks ago, the federal government rushed to put together a very large bailout package to make sure that the damage that they were seeing on Wall Street would be staunched, and also so that all of these businesses that were sidelined would have an opportunity to survive through this crisis. And I think that, I would argue around the edges about exactly how they did that, but it was a necessary action. And stopping the economic collapse, I think, was a good thing. But what they failed to do is they failed to support the fundamental infrastructure and platform upon which all of this economic activity launches. And that is the sort of basic infrastructure of our state and local governments. While the federal government rushed to bail out Carnival Cruises and Ruth's Chris Steakhouse and all these companies and airlines that had invested billions of dollars in stock buybacks, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions actually total, thrown at companies all over the country. And yet the amount that was put out there to help states keep their schools open and to help keep, police officers on the streets in cities, or to help keep sanitation workers, or to help keep social workers who are working with our mentally ill or physically disabled population, all of the money that's needed to keep those things happening, which I think are critical elements of the support in our community that keeps everything going. That was left behind by Congress. And we even heard Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, stand up and say that he's not interested in a blue state bailout, implying somehow that this was, a political calculation on his part, not just implying, flat out saying that, as the most powerful senator in the U.S. Senate, the leader of the United States Senate, that he was going to choose who to look out for and who to rescue and who to let, sink based on partisanship. I thought that was it was scary and it was ugly, and we've seen it now recently in the last few days, where even the president has been threatening Michigan and other states like Michigan based on what our Secretary of State had said that she was going to do. And just to cover that briefly, Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson this week announced that she was going to make sure that every single registered voter in Michigan got an absentee ballot application, so that they could apply to get an absentee ballot. And I think that's a great thing. And we're going to talk a little bit later about legislation I've introduced. I've introduced legislation to promote vote at home, to do exactly what the Secretary of State is saying that she's going to do. So obviously I support that. But I just thought it was very, very interesting that the president sought to single out Democratic secretaries of state who are mailing ballot applications to every voter, but he is silent on help to states that are led by Republicans who are doing the exact same thing. And it's sad that the pandemic response has gotten so partisan in DC, and frankly, it's gotten very partisan in Lansing as well. So that's the next thing I want to talk about is, so what's been happening in the legislature? I've been talking about the president and the help that we need from Congress that I know we've got our delegation's support on. Talked a lot about the governor's executive orders. I haven't really talked much about what's been happening in the legislature. So the broad view is that starting, back closer to the beginning of this pandemic response, there was a lot of noise in the legislature, particularly from my conservative colleagues about the shutdown, and particularly about things like they wanted to have golfing opened, they wanted to have motorboating to be allowed, they wanted landscaping companies to be able to operate. And and I'll say that for my part, for my office, there were things that we were encouraging the governor to take a look at opening, and other things we're encouraging her to take a stronger stand on. And so as a result of some of that work that was happening, from business leaders and from legislators and from community members pushing the governor in both directions, what ended up happening was at the beginning of the month here, all of those activities were opened up and are now happening. Golfing is opened up. A lot of recreational activities are opened up. Landscaping companies are operating. The governor's given the green light to construction and real estate. And all of these things that are reopening, she's giving them that green light with the additional requirement that they maintain social distancing and that they take certain precautions with respect to the equipment that they provide their employees. So that's kind of what's happened, as I've seen it at the broadest level, is that when folks have made arguments to the administration about areas that should be opened or not opened, the administration has been responding to those, and there has been a phased, step-by-step reopening of various elements of the economy, and we've seen that continue here in the last couple of weeks with everything that I just talked about a moment ago. So, what has the legislature been doing during all of this? Now, I've been standing up on the floor of the legislature and saying, we should be talking about testing. The public needs comprehensive, available testing that is quick and accurate so that people have confidence in their own health and the health of their community. And if we expect, things to reopen in any sort of successful way, I think testing is going to be an essential element. And so I think the legislature should be talking about that. How can we provide more testing? How can we provide more PPE? What are the standards for employers who are looking to reopen? How can we make sure that employees who are worried about going back to work have the confidence that they're going to have the support in their employment environment that they need? So those are the kinds of things I think the legislature should be working on. Unfortunately, what the legislature has mostly been working on are various bills to attack the governor's powers to act swiftly during an emergency. So we saw legislation advanced to sue the governor, and also legislation along with that to limit the power of this governor or any future governor to act swiftly during an emergency. So the backdrop of this is that many, many years ago, the legislature empowered governors under two different acts. There was the Emergency Powers of the Governor Act in 1945, and then there was an act in 1976 that I believe is called the Emergency Management Act. In any event, these two acts grant the governor a pretty broad power during an emergency to change statutes, to temporarily implement rules and laws. And the legislature did this for reasons I think we can all understand, which is that we know the legislature is not well positioned to act quickly during an emergency. We know that legislatures are contemplative, maybe even sluggish bodies. And so the legislature on two different occasions said, we're going to give the governor this authority because we know that in an emergency, we need to have a leader who is empowered to make these types of decisions temporarily. And so anyway, what happened in the legislature was that because of all of the rancor and frustration among my Republican colleagues about the way that the governor has exercised her powers under these laws, they decided to sue the governor. And so that the legislature has put a lot of its energy behind this lawsuit. And so far, here's my read on it. I think that in the end, the governor's powers are going to be upheld. My reading of the law as a non-attorney is that she is well within her authority under these acts to issue these orders, and that what's going to end up happening in the end is that, like Judge Cynthia Stevens ruled in the Court of Claims this week, when it goes up to the state's higher courts, it's going to be a almost complete victory for the governor, and there'll be some sort of shred of a victory for the Republicans around the details of the 76 Act. Because what they're really the argument they're trying to hang their hat on is that the 1976 Act has a 28-day time limit, and that at the end of 28 days, the governor is supposed to come back to the legislature and ask for an extension of the emergency. And so their argument is that, well, because the 76 Act was passed after the 45 Act, and because it has this time limit, that time limit also applies to the 1945 Act. But the governor's team's argument is that if the legislature wanted the 1976 Act to supersede and to apply to all the terms of the 1945 Act, they would have written it that way, and they didn't. And so, once again, that's kind of the legal argument. But for me, the political argument is, why the heck are we talking about taking away the powers of the governor during this crisis. This is just a purely political endeavor. We should instead, like I said, let's talk about unemployment and how we can help the agency get more of our people connected. I know in my office, we're working with a lot of people on unemployment struggles, and this is a acute, serious problem that hundreds of thousands of our citizens are facing. That's what we should be talking about. We should be talking about testing, PPE, and contract tracing, and all the different things that deserve a legislative influence. It deserves the legislature to weigh in on those issues. So I do think, though, that in the last couple of weeks, there's been a bit of a transition in terms of what's been happening in the legislature, and we've done a couple things that I do think are important and positive. One is last week we did pass a $500 million appropriation to address coronavirus response concerns. And all of that $508 million came out of roughly $3 billion that the state got from the federal government for coronavirus response. Now, we're not allowed to use any of that money for our schools or for paying our police officers or anything like that, where that would be a typical expense of state government, but we are allowed to use it for beefing up our healthcare capacity. We were able to use those dollars to stand up the field hospital. We are able to use those dollars for specific acute coronavirus response concerns. So we did direct a large chunk of those dollars to be available to local governments to support PPE for first responders. And then another big chunk of those dollars was actually to support a sort of a hero's pay, a pay increase for direct care workers. And for those of you who've been coming to many of my coffee hours over the course of the last couple of years, or even those of you who were familiar with the work I was doing in the State House back before 2016, you know that this is an area that's very, very close to my heart, the pay for these direct care workers. These are roughly 135,000 people who provide direct caregiving service to about 1 million seniors and disabled people here in the state of Michigan. And they provide this service in the home. It's very intimate, difficult work, and they're not paid very much to do this work. And it was a real crisis before the coronapocalypse to even find individuals who are able and willing to do this work at the rate that the state was paying. Well, in any event, in this bill that we passed just this week in the legislature, we're increasing the pay of those individuals by $3 an hour, which is something that I hope that we can keep going either completely or in large part after the coronapocalypse, because I do think that these workers were in desperate need of a pay raise before this, and that they do important work. But that I was really happy that the legislature is taking action on these types of things now. We're finding some of these problems and we're trying to solve them with the available resources that we have. And so that was something that good that happened. The other thing that I think that is good that is happening in the legislature right now is that we've started up committee work again, and it's started up slowly, but there is important work that we need to do. For instance, I am very, very eager to get meeting in the Judiciary Committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, to move along the expungement package that was passed by the House last fall. This is important legislation that's going to help hundreds of thousands of people. There's broad bipartisan agreement. We need to get it done. Even though we're all focused on and struggling with COVID-19, this is something that's teed up and ready to go. So I'm glad we're starting to get those wheels turning again. I'm eager to have that heard. But the one thing that we are already focusing on that I want to give my conservative colleagues some appreciation for is that we've started meeting in the Oversight Committee. We started talking about oversight of the governor's executive's response to COVID-19. And I think that's an important role of the legislature, and I'm glad I'm on that committee. And we're focusing specifically on what's happening in nursing homes, which I think is a critical area for us to be focusing on. It's a difficult and essential need that the state is in a position to provide and has an obligation to provide. And so I'm glad we're digging into that. And we've had a couple hearings on it so far, and we're going to have another one next week, next Wednesday is what I've heard. So in addition to that, there's a lot that we're doing out of the Senate District 18 office. I'll take a moment to thank my team. I have the joy and honor of working with a lot of great people, and my office team has really been working extra hours because like the folks at unemployment, there are just a lot of citizens who are struggling right now, having problems with either the response and everything that's happening in our economy and in our community, or I mean, just a huge volume of folks who are literally struggling with state government and with some of the systems that we have in place to try to help folks that are overloaded. Our unemployment system, we've had, the last number I heard was we had 1.7 million claims. I think that number is maybe even a week old at this point. And this is an office that was handling thousands or maybe tens of thousands of claims a week. Now they're getting over 300,000 claims a week coming in. And so as folks who have been trying to get their unemployment turned on, as this system has been very, very overloaded. And my office has been working with folks on unemployment pretty aggressively. Also, we still have been working on legislation, and I think that while the corona apocalypse has taken over most of our efforts and concerns, it's important for us to keep working on bills. And so we've got some stuff in the works that I think is really important with respect to criminal justice reform. We've got some police training legislation that I've been working on for a long time that I think is important. We're working with the jail diversion task force, trying to get our bills through that would end cash bond, but also working on other bills that would affect warrants, bills that would affect parole and probation. So these are all very, very important. But we've also introduced some legislation during the last month that I want to talk about. One, we introduced legislation, and I really want to give credit to my colleague, Senator Geis. I think she was really out front and the leader on this, but I joined her and Senator Chang and Senator Ollier and Senator Alexander in a package of legislation that is really meant to help protect against eviction and foreclosure. We all know that right now the governor's orders are prohibiting any evictions or foreclosures during the COVID-19 crisis, but there's going to be a bubble of problems and issues at the end of this, and we need to help people through those. And it's in the public interest to try to keep people in housing and to try to make sure that all these lenders are working with folks who are struggling to pay their bills at this time. We need to get everybody back on track and not have a wave of evictions and foreclosures disrupt our neighborhoods and our families and our economy. We're also, we just introduced this week, got a lot of positive press on some legislation around alcohol regulations. So I'm working together with Senator McMorrow on two bills, Senate Bill 938 and 939. And what 938 does, which is Senator McMorrow's bill, is it would allow licensees to sell cocktails to go. So right now in Michigan, if you want to go to a brewer and buy a growler or something like that to go, that is legal, but it's not legal to go and buy, say a margarita to go or a Manhattan to go or something. So, and it's been that way in Michigan forever. I think it really dates back to the fact that Michigan was actually the first state to come out of prohibition in March of 1933. We were the first state to pass laws authorizing the sale of alcohol. And as a result, we have pretty restrictive laws in Michigan still. Over the course of the last 10 years I've been involved in state government, we've been loosening those little bit by bit. And I think this is one more way that we should loosen these rules. Also, I heard, and I know my colleague Senator McMorrow heard from a lot of her restaurants and bars that closing off that section of their menu makes it very, very difficult for them to survive. And so, we want to open up that element of their menu. We want to open up that line of business so that our bars and restaurants that are trying to survive through this crisis have a better chance of doing so. And so that, we allow that going forward. The other bill, Senate Bill 939, allows the creation of social districts, entertainment districts. It would basically be an allowance for local governments to create a zone where open container laws don't apply. This would, I think, facilitate entertainment districts. It would facilitate, festivals. It would loosen some of the rules around exactly how, a beer tent or something like that would work in an environment like that. And it would be enabling of local governments who wanted to create something like you see in a lot of other great cities around the country, whether it's New Orleans or Memphis or any number of places that have these types of social districts. Finally, the other piece of legislation, maybe saving the best for last that I introduced recently that I'm really excited about is this vote at home legislation. I think people are going to be happier if they vote at home. We've seen that in the 5 states that do this, that voters are more satisfied, voter satisfaction goes up, voter participation goes up. They're able to run safe, secure elections, mostly through the mail, but with additional opportunities for people to drop off their ballot or to come in and re-register and get a ballot right on the spot at their clerk's office if that was their preference. So I introduced that legislation this last couple of weeks. I think it's very, very important that we always look at trying to improve our voting systems to make them better for voters, easier for voters, more secure. And I think that this actually does all those things. In addition, it would save us millions of dollars. The 5 states that are already doing this save millions of dollars every year because it's expensive and difficult to recruit all the individuals and train them to sit at these polling places all day long. And by consolidating those large number of polling places into a smaller number of absentee count boards, you can still have all the same, requirements in terms of training and security and challengers from the different parties and all of that. By consolidating it down, you can save millions of dollars across the state the size of Michigan. So I'm excited about that. And I was particularly excited that the Secretary of State said that, under her authority, she's going to make sure that every voter knows that because of Proposal 3 that we passed with a huge majority in November of 2018, that every single voter has the right to vote an absentee ballot. And if they request a ballot, that one shall be delivered to them. So it's great that that's happening. But I also think that it was important that this discussion gets started in the legislature. I've asked the chair of the Senate Elections Committee to take this bill up. I don't think that she's going to be willing to do so. But once again, despite that, I think that it's important, despite the opposition we've heard from Trump and others, I think it's important that we talk about vote at home and why that would be cheaper and why it is that it increases voter satisfaction and voter participation. All good things. So that is most of my update. The one other thing I wanted to say before trying to see if we had any questions streaming in is that I think the next thing that's going to be a big concern that I'm going to be hopefully a good vector for getting information out about is what's happening with schools in the fall. I think that is especially important here in Washtenaw County, given that some of our major employers are education employers as well. So I just wanted to give you a quick update just of what I've heard and what is coming down. Obviously, every one of these entities is going to have their own decision-making process and their own governance, and I'm going to be looking to those bodies to be making these decisions over the course of the next couple of months. But I think that parents who are worried about what's going to happen in the fall with their kids, employees of our major educational institutions who are concerned about their safety and their schedule, I just want to say that, hey, now is the time to start talking to your locally elected leaders and your locally empowered leaders in these spaces about what you want to happen this fall. Because I think this discussion is happening now, and I think it's going to evolve over the course of the next couple months. But of course, there's a lot of inertia involved in making these decisions about big entities like schools. And so I don't think our school leaders are going to be able to wait until the last minute to make these decisions. They're going to have to make them in the pretty short term. So here's what I'm hearing. So far, the University of Michigan and EMU are both saying that in-person classes, they're expecting them to happen this fall. They're talking about how that will be different, and that's a very sort of glossing over high-level explanation, but they're basically saying that they're expecting in-person on campus this fall. The only school district so far that I've seen putting out a template for what they're expecting to see this fall so far is Ann Arbor Public Schools. I know that all of the other schools in the district are talking about that, and I would encourage parents and employees to let their administrators and school board members know what they want. But I think that I've heard a lot of reactions this week from other AAPS parents about what that district is talking about. And so far what they're talking about, just in broad strokes, is an early start. They're talking about getting started before Labor Day this year, which would be a change for that district. I don't think it would be for many of the other surrounding districts, but talking about moving the start time up. And they're also talking about sort of a modified in-person schedule. And, when you look at the announcement from the superintendent, which, I'll try to get posted in the chat, it talks about spacing within classrooms. It talks about a blended virtual learning plus in-person learning environment. And so that's going to be a huge change for our students. I think it's going to be a huge change for families. I think it's going to be a huge change for childcare and work schedules and how that bends around the school year for those of us with kids. So the trickle of information is just starting to come out about what's happening and what's going to happen this fall with schools. I think that discussion is going to be a really important one that's going to take place from now, going forward over the course of the next couple months. And so I would encourage folks to get involved in that if they have strong feelings. So those were my updates. I'm going to see if I have the capacity to pull up any questions that we're getting. Alrighty. So I'm also just seeing an update from Annie on here, just in terms of unemployment cases. So for those of you who have reached out to our office, thank you for doing so. We're doing our best to assist. We've referred about 550 of the more complicated cases to the department, individually from our office, and we're trying to walk a lot more folks through the system to the extent that their problems can be solved just by filling out the paperwork differently. But I would encourage anybody who's still having a problem to go to senatedems.com/Irwin/unemployment. There's a form there. If you fill that out, that will tell my team, primarily Annie Somerville, the details that we need to be able to work with the department. You can also call the office. You can also just email the office, and we'll work with you and try our best to help. But there's going to be a lot of questions we're going to have about, where your case stands with UIA, what other identifying numbers and other details. And that form already is set up to collect the information we're going to need. So if you want to save yourself a couple back and forths and a little bit of time in the process, please use that form. I would also say that for those of you who are worried because you've been unable to break through the unemployment system, couple things. One, I know this is not good news, but our experience working with the hundreds of people we've been working with is that unemployment is running about 3 weeks behind. So when that paperwork that goes in says, I have a problem, there's some sort of non-monetary issue or something like that where a human being needs to look at my case to fix it, those are running about 3 weeks in terms of unemployment's ability to get back to people. So that's not good news, but those are the facts. That's what we're seeing on the ground. Also, I would say that for folks who are concerned that their unemployment hasn't been turned on, but they're concerned specifically about the fact that, well, hey, I've been unemployed for 3 weeks and I still haven't been able to get through. What we're seeing is that, in fact, unemployment will start paying you at the date that you became unemployed. And they've been reliably good on that. We had a town hall just focused on unemployment last week. We heard that from the deputy director, heard it from the director as well. And I've heard that from constituents as well. I know it can be very nerve-wracking for people who haven't been getting any support and haven't been working. I just want folks to know that that's the experience that we've seen, bar none, is that, if you were unemployed starting on March 25th or something like that, then even if you don't get your unemployment authorized until May 25th, they will still pay you during those weeks you were unemployed, but hadn't been able to get certified. All right. So trying to look through these Facebook comments. So there's a question about guns at the Capitol. So I didn't really talk much about that, but I guess that's something that's gotten a lot of press in the last couple of weeks. There were protests at the Capitol. There were individuals who were open carrying at the Capitol. This is something that has been a pretty regular occurrence at the Capitol during the time I've served in Lansing. People open carrying. This is the first time, though, that I think it's really gotten a lot of public attention. I think that a lot of people in the public are really surprised to hear that there's no sort of ban on guns in the Capitol. I think it's particularly frustrating that there is a ban on signs, but there's not on guns. I've always thought that was pretty ridiculous. But I see there's a question specifically just about and this is based on some Facebook back and forth we had a few days ago about there's legislation currently that would ban guns at the Capitol and on the Capitol lawn and would create security checkpoints at the Capitol. And there was a question about whether or not I was on board with that legislation, and I said that I don't want security checkpoints at the Capitol. I don't think that they will actually work for a number of reasons. And the Capitol is only sort of one of the venues where the legislators do our work. Mostly our committee meetings are held in a handful of buildings that are not in the Capitol. And so it just seems like a huge expense to me. I'm really worried about our budget. I'm worried about literally taking money away from programs that put food on kids' tables, and the idea of spending precious dollars on metal detectors that aren't going to actually keep someone out of the Capitol who's committed to bringing a gun in. I don't like it. So that's kind of my reaction on that. I don't think it's a good expenditure of dollars. I don't think it would actually work to make anyone safer. So I don't really like security checkpoints. Plus, we've got a lot of school kids and a lot of visitors come through the Capitol. The Capitol has a great tour. I would encourage anybody who hasn't been on the Capitol tour, if you at all care about history, if you geek out on history like I do, definitely go to take the Capitol tour, because there's a lot of really cool stories, a lot of great history in that building. And and I just want it to have an open feel. The more it has a lockdown feel, I think it creates more damage than it would solve. Also some questions sort of about encouraging me to talk a little bit more about what's going on in our prisons. This is a major area of concern, and certainly in my office, as I said, one of the earlier things that I reached out to the governor's team about, because it's just obvious, right? Particularly when you have a very overcrowded prison like we have in my district. My district happens to be home to the state's only women's prison, Huron Valley Women's Correctional Facility. And that facility is dramatically overcrowded. It's been overcrowded for years. We've been working on this problem for a long time. I believe there are a lot of people there who could and should be let out, and that would help with the overcrowding problem. And so, as I said earlier, the effort to accelerate the parole process has taken some pressure off of that population, but there's still more that could be done. And sort of to take a segue to a related issue, that's one of the reasons why I'm working on legislation to restore good time credits and disciplinary credits in the prisons. So back in the 90s, the state adopted a law that at the time was called Truth in Sentencing. And what that basically meant was that prisons no longer had the opportunity to credit inmates for any sort of good time or disciplinary time within the prisons for behaving well. And this created a lot of problems. The problem it created at the macro level was mass incarceration. Michigan has one of the longest average length of stay in the entire nation. It's one of the reasons why our prison population is relatively high compared to other states, because we tend to lock people up longer, and it's because of this truth in sentencing law. The other problem is that it doesn't give the prisons themselves, the correctional officers and the wardens and everyone else and people doing the programming, doesn't give everyone the right tools to manage behavior properly inside. And so it makes a big difference when folks know that by acting right inside, they are building a trajectory to be able to get out sooner and continue that sort of corrected behavior. And that's the whole idea behind it. And so that's why we're working on legislation in my office to repeal that law from the 90s, that Get Tough on Crime law. And then there's other work happening between my office and other offices. Also, I should say that our Chief Justice and our Lieutenant Governor, so Chief Justice McCormick and Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist, have really taken a lot of leadership in this space. And so hopefully, as a result of all that work, we can get some improvements to do that whole truth in sentencing regime if we can't get it repealed completely. So there's a question here about how will the legislature assist with rent and mortgage defaults. I would direct Ms. Stein to the legislation that I spoke about a few minutes ago. I don't know that it is a total solution to this problem, which is a significant one, but it does provide relief from evictions and foreclosures. And so it is designed, this package of legislation is designed to address this very problem. I think, frankly, you know, more needs to be done at the federal level as well. There are limitations to what states can do. So we have limitations here in Michigan of a political nature, but there are also the legal and constitutional limitations, and it would make a lot of sense if Congress were to take some action that would affect all the banks and all the lenders federally. But we are working on that, and I would encourage you to check out that legislation. And if Annie's able to put a link to that, the press release that documents those bill numbers that's on my website in the chat, that would be super helpful. There's a question here about Senate Bill 528 and insurance reform and its impact on motorcyclists. I am afraid that I am not prepared to speak specifically on 528 because that number is not implanted in my head. I don't know the specifics of that, and I am reluctant, without looking it up and sort of double checking, to go too far on this limb. But I do think I know which bill you're talking about, and if it is what I think it is legislation that would essentially close a loophole that I would argue a loophole that was created by Senate Bill 1 that we passed last year. So just to put it in context, last year we passed changes to Michigan's auto insurance law. We essentially, put a big hole in the whole no-fault idea. And I voted against this legislation. I voted against it for a lot of reasons. I don't think it's going to result in rate relief, and I do think it's going to result in people not getting the care they need. But this legislation also, in addition to just being, I think, a bad idea in general, there were a lot of holes and a lot of mistakes that were made because the way that the legislature acted on Senate Bill 1 was extremely hasty. And so one of the problems that was created was that the insurance system, the no-fault insurance system before, didn't really work for motorcyclists, I would argue. It was already not optimal or not even really fair, I would say, for motorcyclists. But what they did is, in the changes in Senate Bill 1, is they made it even worse. And so if this is the bill that sort of closes that motorcyclist loophole, then it's something that I support. And you're absolutely right. The July 2nd is right around the corner. And what is meant by that is that all these changes to what kind of insurance people can buy is right around the corner. And I think that we need to close this loophole for motorcyclists. I also think that we need to close it with respect to pedestrians and cyclists as well. It used to be under the old law that if you were horribly injured, walking across the street, and you didn't have auto coverage yourself because maybe you didn't drive because you're a child or because of a disability or for any number of reasons, you'd be covered by the person who hit you. You'd be covered by their insurance at least. So the changes that we made to auto no fault now mean that if that person who hit you has capped coverage, then you're out of luck, and you're going to be thrown into Medicaid and get dramatically less coverage, and you're really going to lose out on all the post-acute care that Michigan really has been a worldwide leader in. I mean, we've had high rates for auto insurance, and that's a problem that still needs to be dealt with, frankly. But one of the benefits that we had of our no-fault system was that Michigan was the best place to get treated for a traumatic brain injury. And I'm really worried about all of the rehabilitative and other post-acute care, and that I don't know if it can survive in this new world. But yes, closing that loophole for motorcyclists and pedestrians and cyclists is important. Am I hearing any movement on that? I guess your question is asking. I'm not hearing any movement on that. No. I've gotten some letters into my office about it. We've responded similarly to how I'm responding now. But I'm not on the insurance committee, so I wouldn't necessarily hear those rumblings, but it's not something I'm hearing yet. We were pushing hard on trying to fix these last fall. Representative Bolden out of Southfield introduced some, I think, really good legislation on the House side to fix some of these problems. And there was some hope, I think, in the fall that the Republican leaders would take that up to sort of fix these problems before we got to, this year where the changes are starting to be implemented. But it hasn't happened yet, and it's a frustration. So is there any movement on licenses for all? No, there's not any movement on that, except of course there's been proposals made, but there hasn't been any movement on those proposals. This is one of these issues where whenever we talk about it, I'm always, maybe surprised isn't the right word anymore, but it's the word I have right now, surprised that the angry letters we get from people. It's always been my thinking that we want everybody who is driving on Michigan roads to be doing so safely and legally and to be paying into the insurance pool. I mean, just a second ago, I was talking about how Michigan has some of the highest insurance rates in the country. Why is it that we're trying to not let people buy insurance? I don't understand that, right? Like, I understand that some people are really upset and frustrated with federal immigration laws, and they may have all sorts of different complicated disagreements about the way we do immigration in the United States. I may agree or disagree with how they feel about that, but the bottom line is that on our streets here in Michigan, we should want people to be, to have passed a driving test and to have bought a proper registration so that we can use that money to fix their roads, and to be properly insured so that if there is a horrible accident, that people can be made whole or as close to whole as possible. So I really think that what's happening is that racism is causing people to be blinded from what is really the public interest in this situation. So to the question, yeah, they should be available to everyone regardless of immigration status. And I think that we should be treating people with respect, and that we should be upholding the basic human dignity and human rights of all in a better way than we are. Having said all that, it just also makes sense, and I always try to hammer on sort of the practical elements of this issue, because it makes no sense to me, once again, that we would want people driving on our streets who aren't properly licensed, aren't properly plated, aren't paying into fixing our roads, and aren't paying into our insurance pool. These people, are parts of our community, and thank goodness they are. And we should create systems so that they can, live successfully here, contribute successfully, and so that we don't create problems by trying to build walls between people. All right. Can I talk about the Republican effort to take away some of the emergency powers and how that could have affected her response to the floods of the coronavirus? So I did talk about that a fair amount earlier. I'll try to cover it again a bit to say that a couple weeks ago, the Republicans brought us all to Lansing, and the action that they brought us there to take wasn't about more testing, wasn't about PPE or supporting small businesses or fixing unemployment or trying to deal with some of the more horrible and acute problems created by coronavirus. No, it was about suing the governor to reduce the governor's powers. And they refused to authorize a resolution to extend her powers, which she had recommended that they do under the 1976 Act, even though she asserted that she still had the ability to issue these orders under the 1945 Act. And just to get a little bit more into the weeds of this, I didn't talk about this earlier, but one of the reasons why the governor asked the legislature to reauthorize the emergency declaration under the 1976 Act is because in the 1976 Act, there was something that was added, which is that if the state is under a declaration of emergency under that 1976 Act, employers have liability protection against claims that they may have infected someone with COVID-19. And so one of the reasons why the governor asked the legislature to extend her powers under the 76 Act, even though she seemed to clearly have those powers over a longer period of time under the 1945 Act is because of those liability protections, which are available under the 76 Act, but are not included in the 45 Act. And so, once again, what the Republicans did is they didn't authorize a resolution to extend her authority, but what they did is they passed a resolution authorizing the hiring of attorneys to sue her and to try to say that governors shouldn't be able to act in an emergency beyond 28 days without the legislature's approval. And they also passed a bill that would reduce that time limit from 28 days to 14 days, so that the governor in the future would have to come back every 14 days and ask for the legislature's approval on any expenditures or other executive actions. I don't think this is really supported by the public. I think it's just a purely political effort by them to try to throw dirt in the governor's face. And, I stood up on the floor and said all of this in real time to them as well, because it really frustrated me that, here we are in the middle of a crisis. There are people across our state who are genuinely struggling. There are people who are struggling with their health. There are people who are dying. There are people who have loved ones who they are losing. And then we have people who have businesses that are struggling. People have jobs, careers that they're worried about. There are people who have invested their entire lives in trying to build a career and trying to build a business, and now they're worried about that. And we're getting together as a legislature to sue the governor. To me, it just seemed like a really an example of misplaced priorities and people putting politics ahead of the actual work, which is how can we support our people. If there's something that the governor was doing that was not on point, they should go after that. They should zero in on needed actions that are not being taken. Or if they wanted to say that the governor's actions were completely wrong and that we should not have a stay-at-home order, they should say that. But the problem is that they don't want to say that. They know the public doesn't support that. They don't even support that. But they also have this very loud faction that is asking for them to attack her at a time when she's being considered for vice president and right before a presidential election where Michigan is going to be the epicenter of the political battle, possibly. And so to me, I was just very, very sad and disappointed with the way that the legislature has dealt with this pandemic throughout it. I feel like that approach is transitioning. As I said earlier, in this last week, we got together and passed some appropriations that were genuinely helpful and related to COVID response. We're starting to have hearings. We're having some oversight hearings on, how we are addressing COVID-19 in nursing homes. I think that's important. So hopefully the transition that we've seen in the last week is a transition towards something more productive and something more focused on helping Michigan's people. But definitely a couple of weeks ago, all we were talking about was suing the governor, trying to reduce a future executive's power to act swiftly in emergencies. And, it's funny too, because I served for so many years under Snyder and throughout the emergency management crisis and was a part of how much that had to do with the crisis that happened in Flint. So, I'm all about flexing legislative power, and being on team legislature. But I think in a time like this, we have to appreciate why the legislature in 45 and 76 passed the laws they did. If we had to wait for this legislature to take action on crisis response, a lot more people would have died, and the damage to our economy would have been tremendously greater. And so anyway, that's kind of my recap on what's been happening. A few more questions have come in. We're getting towards the end of our time here, and I know that with an online event, I don't want to strain people's attention too long, but we'll go a little bit long to make sure we get some of these other questions. Question about sort of in the wake of all these changes to no fault, what happens with the catastrophic fund? So the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association is a fund that has over $20 billion in it, last I saw. And it is a fund that is meant to cover all of the claims for all of the individuals who have gotten in car accidents in the state of Michigan and have now a promise of lifetime care for any needs they have related to their auto accident. And so the individuals who are still receiving care from the Catastrophic Claims Association because they were injured, a week ago, or by someone who did carry a unlimited no-fault benefit, then those folks are they still have that unlimited benefit, and with the exception of the reduction in service providers and that sort of negative impact, those folks are still going to be fully covered. And so that $20 billion is supposed to be there to cover all those folks and to cover all the folks who are still living under unlimited coverage right now, up until July 1st, when people start switching over to limited coverage. So what's going to happen to that is that the Catastrophic Claims Association is required to do auditing on a regular basis. And if that fund is, according to the actuaries, more than 120% funded, they're going to be required to give rebates. But that fund is not going to wind down for probably at least another 30 years. And even at that point, there's going to be some folks who were injured, tomorrow, and who might be very young, who are still in that pool. At that point, there'll probably be some sort of like structured buyout or annuity conversations. I don't know what's going to happen down the line there, but I think we're going to be living with an MCCA for at least 20, 30 years while the big bubble of folks that are in there, wind out. And so that's what's likely to happen. Also, the assessments that we pay per vehicle for MCCA are supposed to dramatically drop. And, we're going to see that all happen on the back of the actuarial reports. So can I give you any updates on line 5 and any other water quality issues? Yeah, absolutely. A lot going on with this. The Michigan Public Service Commission just had a public comment period on Enbridge's latest effort. My office put in a comment on behalf of the 18th District, urging the Public Service Commission to not accept Enbridge's request, which is essentially their request right now is to not have to do the regular permitting process for the building of their tunnel. They're trying to allege that the easement and the agreement that they made with the state in 1953 should be enough to cover, everything going forward. I'm overstating their position, I suppose, to be fair to them. But that's kind of the crux of it, is that they're trying to short circuit a permitting process around the building of their tunnel. And we put in a comment saying that the Public Service Commission should not do that. Also, the UP Energy Task Force is still meeting. One of the things that I think is most interesting conversation that I've been trying to push forward in this area is around heat pumps, heat exchange, geothermal, all of that. If the state were to invest in converting the heating and cooling needs of the Upper Peninsula that relies on propane from line 5, we could actually meet those needs at a lower cost long term. And so one of the things that I'm also working on, which is related to this, is some legislation that we call the PACE legislation. Property Assessed Clean Energy is what it stands for. And it's essentially a way to use government financing to create special assessment zones to invest in energy efficiency equipment. So once again, as I said a second ago, if you look at things like heat exchangers, heat pumps, geothermal, these systems can be cheaper over the long term than continuing to rely on propane. But the problem is they're not cheaper in the short term. They require a big investment up front, and then you make up your money and it ends up being cheaper over time. But for these homeowners, they might not have that upfront investment. And so that's one of the reasons why they're shackled to these fossil fuels. So by creating new financing methodologies that could actually put tons of people to work, making tangible improvements that save people money long term, and that pay for themselves. Those are the kinds of ideas I think we need to start putting into play to end our reliance on fossil fuels, which is my end game goal here. That's a quick update on line 5. There's also some important stuff happening on PFAS right now. The governor and her Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy has put out a new set of proposed regulations on PFAS. It's kind of like a first in the nation state effort to regulate PFAS. It's great. I have urged the administration to go farther. I think there are ways it could be even better, but they have rolled out those rules. and they're currently in front of JCAR right now. JCAR is the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. That's a legislative body that I sit on. And once we have 15 session days without JCAR rejecting those rules, they can go into effect. And I'm hoping that that happens soon. What is my stance on the public use of CFD protocol? I don't know what that is. So it looks like that is the end of the questions I've got. I can try to Google that at some point. If it's something related to state government, it's obviously something I should seek to understand better. But hey, I just want to close by thanking everybody who's listened either live or who's caught this on tape. We're going to continue to do these regular updates virtually, and then as soon as we can start doing them live and in person, we'll start doing those as well then. It's really an honor and a pleasure to represent the 18th District in the State Senate. We're going to continue working on important legislation that looking forward in terms of coming out of this pandemic. If folks have concerns or questions about anything that's happening in the state government, feel free to email my office or to call. And once again, if you're still struggling with unemployment, please let us try to help you. There's a lot of folks who are in your boat. So fill out that form at senatedems.com/Irwin/unemployment, and we'll do our best to try to navigate that system for you. So stay safe, stay at home, have a great weekend, and thanks for joining this morning.